The average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Zurich right now is around 3,500 francs a month. That's before electricity, before health insurance, before groceries. That, according to Eurostat's 2024 comparison, were the most expensive in Europe, running around 61% above the EU average. Switzerland has the highest wages on the continent, and yet a growing number of Swiss people genuinely cannot afford to live here anymore. So what went wrong in the richest country in the world? Because on paper, Switzerland makes no sense as a crisis. GDP per capita among the highest on earth, unemployment below 3%, a financial system so stable that Switzerland remains the world-leading centre for international wealth management. When people picture Switzerland, they picture precision watches, alpine villages, and a quality of life that the rest of Europe can only dream about. But ask anyone actually living here, and you get a very different story. There is a gap opening up between what Switzerland looks like from the outside and what it actually feels like to live inside it. And that gap has been widening for years. To understand where Switzerland is now, we have to go back to what built it. After the Second World War, Switzerland found itself in an extraordinary position. It had stayed neutral, its cities weren't bombed, its factories were intact. While Germany and France spent a decade rebuilding from rubble, Switzerland was already exporting pharmaceuticals, machinery, and financial services to a world desperate for stability. The Swiss franc became a global safe haven. Multinationals planted their European headquarters in Zurich and Geneva. Banks attracted private wealth from every corner of the world. And the country developed something rare, a genuinely diversified high-skill economy that paid its workers well and exported things the world actually needed. By the 1990s, Switzerland had one of the highest standards of living on earth, and it had earned it. The wages were real, the stability was real, the infrastructure was world-class. For a generation of Swiss workers, the system genuinely delivered. But that success created something that would later become a serious problem. Switzerland became extraordinarily attractive, not just to tourists and multinationals, but to wealthy individuals, foreign capital, and hundreds of thousands of workers from across Europe who came for the salaries and stayed for the lifestyle. And the country was simply never built to absorb that kind of pressure. Switzerland has a home ownership rate of around 36%. That's one of the lowest in Europe, lower than Germany, France, even the Netherlands and Denmark, countries people typically associate with renting. The vast majority of Swiss people rent their homes their entire lives, and that seemed to work until now because rents were regulated, supply was steady, and wages kept pace. That balance is now broken. The national vacancy rate for rental housing sits below 1%. In Zurich and Geneva, it's closer to 0.5%. What that means practically is that when an apartment becomes available, there are sometimes hundreds of applicants. Landlords can ask almost anything they want, and they do. Average rents in Zurich have increased by over 25% in the last 5 years alone. In Geneva, the situation is worse. A city where international institutions, private banks, and ultra-wealthy residents compete for the same limited housing stock as teachers, healthcare workers, and young families. There is no version of that competition where the teacher wins. And building more housing is not straightforward either. Switzerland has some of the most restrictive planning laws in Europe. Construction in urban areas is slow, expensive, and endlessly contested. Environmental protections, noise regulations, heritage restrictions, all legitimate in isolation, but combined, they created a situation where demand has completely outrun supply for over a decade, with no realistic path to closing the gap. So you have a country where most people rent, where vacancy is almost non-existent, where new supply cannot keep up, and where landlords operate in a market that heavily favours them. The result is predictable. Rents keep rising, and wages, high as they are by European standards, haven't kept pace with what it actually costs to live here. But here's where it gets worse. Healthcare in Switzerland is not a public system. It's mandatory private insurance. Every single resident is legally required to buy health coverage from a private insurer. You cannot opt out, and the cost has been rising every year for 2 decades. In many cases, adults now pay several hundred francs a month for mandatory health insurance, and in inexpensive cantons or lower deductible plans, the bill can exceed 500 francs. For a family of 4, that's over 1,500 francs a month, and that's before anyone has even seen a doctor, not to mention dental, which is almost entirely excluded from basic coverage. Since 2010, premiums have increased by over 70%. Wages over the same period have grown by around 12%. Low and middle income households can apply for government subsidies to help cover the cost. But the subsidy system is patchy, varies by canton, and is not scaled anywhere near the pace of the premium increases. Hundreds of thousands of Swiss residents are paying health insurance bills that take up to 15, 20, sometimes 25% of their take-home pay. In a country where rent already consumes another 30 to 40% for many people, that leaves very little for everything else. As a consequence, people are paying 500 francs a month for health insurance they cannot afford to use. The deductible alone can run up to 2,500 francs a year before the insurance covers a single franc. So families make the calculation, skip the appointment, wait and see. In a country with some of the best hospitals in the world, people are skipping treatment because they simply cannot afford to use the system they're legally forced to pay for. This is the dirty secret of the Swiss standard of living. The headline wage looks impressive, but by the time rent and mandatory health insurance come out, a significant portion of the population is left with less real spending power than equivalent workers in France or Germany, who earn considerably less on paper. Switzerland has around 8.8 million people. Of those, roughly 26% are foreign nationals. This is one of the highest proportions of any country in the world. And within that group, there is an enormous spread, from EU workers doing essential jobs in healthcare and construction to some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet who have chosen Switzerland as their primary or secondary residence. Geneva in particular has become a concentration point for international money. The UN, the Red Cross, hundreds of NGOs and financial institutions, and alongside them, a layer of private wealth that operates on a completely different economic plane to ordinary residents. When a Russian oligarch or a Gulf sovereign fund buys property in Geneva, the price they pay has nothing to do with what a local teacher earns, but it has everything to do with what she pays in rent. And it's not just Geneva. The canton of Zug, just outside Zurich, has become one of the most famous tax havens in the world. Dozens of multinational corporations and thousands of wealthy individuals have parked themselves there specifically because Swiss cantonal tax rules allow it. The result is a small region where property prices have gone completely out of reach for anyone who wasn't already wealthy when they arrived. Local workers, the ones running the shops, driving the buses, staffing the hospitals, commute in from further and further away because they simply cannot afford to live where they work. Switzerland introduced a law in 1983 restricting foreigners from buying residential property, the Lex Koller. It was designed to prevent exactly this kind of price distortion. But the law contains important exemptions and doesn't stop all foreign-linked demand from reaching the market. The result is that in the most desirable parts of the country, property functions less as housing and more as a store of value for international capital. Prices reflect global wealth rather than local wages, and Swiss residents find themselves priced out of neighborhoods their parents lived in. And all of these factors are resulting in one common trend. Swiss people are leaving. Not in enormous numbers yet, but the direction is clear. France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, but increasingly further afield too. Southeast Asia, Latin America, countries that a generation ago Swiss people would never have entertained as a serious option. And yet, here we are. Because if you're 28, earning an entry-level salary in Zurich, paying 1,800 francs for a shared flat, 450 francs for health insurance, and watching the grocery bill eat what's left, the calculation starts to shift. A lower salary in Lyon or Barcelona, where rent is a third of Zurich's cost and healthcare is covered by the state, can leave you with more actual money at the end of the month, more freedom, more life. Take a typical example, a 27-year-old working as a primary school teacher in Zurich. Decent job, stable, the kind of work every society depends on. A monthly salary after tax comes in at around 4,200 francs. Sounds reasonable until you start subtracting. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a decent area, 1,900 francs. Health insurance, 480 francs. Groceries for one person, around 600 francs. Transport, 200 francs. That's 3,180 francs gone. That leaves 1,020 francs for everything else. In Zurich, good luck. And she earns more than half the people in her building. In 2023, the Swiss federal government acknowledged that over 700,000 residents are in what they classify as financially precarious situations. In a country of 8.8 million people, that number has been growing every year since 2019. And it's not just the young. Switzerland has seen a rise in what locals call cross-border shopping. People driving into France or Germany on weekends to do their grocery runs because the savings are significant enough to make it worth the trip. In Basel, a Swiss city that sits right on the French border, Swiss families drive 20 minutes across and fill their boots with cheaper food, cheaper wine, cheaper everything. Around 30% of Swiss households do this regularly. In border regions, that number jumps to nearly 75%. The savings are significant enough that it's become a weekly routine for thousands of households. A country that built its reputation on prosperity is now watching that prosperity skip an entire generation. So why has living in Switzerland become impossible? Not for everyone, that needs to be said. If you're a senior banker in Zurich or a partner at a pharmaceutical firm in Basel, Switzerland still works exactly as advertised. The wages are exceptional, the infrastructure is extraordinary, and the quality of life for those at the top of the income ladder is genuinely hard to match anywhere in the world. But Switzerland has always sold itself on something more than that. It sold itself on the idea that prosperity here was broad, that the system worked for the nurse and the engineer and the young family and the small business owner, not just the private banker, that the high cost of living was matched by a high quality of life across the board. That deal now is fraying. The housing market has priced out a generation. Mandatory health insurance has become a monthly financial punishment for anyone on a middle income. And the foreign wealth that Switzerland spent decades attracting has driven a wedge between the country's image and the reality of life inside it. The wealth is still here. There's never been more of it. The question Switzerland now has to answer is a simple one. Who's it actually for?